This is the headquarters of EK Water Blocks. EK Water Blocks is embroiled in controversy surrounding its finances, solvency, and treatment of partners and staff. In part 2 of our investigation into EK Water Blocks, we explore these allegations with help from people all over the world. Today we present newly acquired documents and evidence, including an intimidating demand letter sent by EKHQ to its former contract staff member, threatening a criminal complaint that they say could result in a year of prison time in Slovenia if 70,000 euros isn't paid. The letter was sent under the command of CEO and founder Edward Koenig last week. That was using EK's lawyer, who himself is reported on by Finance.si for malfeasance and nepotism for conducting business with a state-owned insurance company while his wife holds a parliamentary role. This follows a similar letter from Scale LLP in the US, who at least had the courtesy to remove the whole prison aspect. We also have new first-hand accounts from on-record whistleblowers, lawsuits from former EK staff who successfully sued the company for breach of contract, and specifically for non-payment, which was the complaint from last week, except this lawsuit was filed in 2019 by Sasho Kostelek, former EK contractor. Kostelek went on the record with Gamers Nexus to tell us this, quote, "It wasn't about the money, it was about principle. We also encountered patterns of behavior that we never expected to report on, including threats of physical violence from EK's China-based suppliers." And we're not sure if they're joking or not. In part 2 of this series, we hired an outside investigator. We consulted with 3 lawyers, a financial analyst, a business analyst, and countless other members of the industry and of fields relevant to this. We even hired a drone operator in Slovenia for this. This video cost us over $40,000 to put together. Quote, "Man, you opened such a can of worms, and it's only the tip of the iceberg. Expect a bunch of threats soon. It will be fun," one industry associate on the retail side said to GN. But as if that isn't enough, we have evidence of unsafe working conditions, OSHA violations, racist internal communications, and another company that appears to be associated with an EK CEO that is also stripped of its ability to conduct business due to owing unpaid taxes.
The things that the court will look towards are to see who is controlling this business. And so they'll look at things like whether the business is inadequately capitalized, right? If there's no money in the business because it's being siphoned out to avoid exposure, that indicates it's simply an instrument of someone else.
We'll also show you Slovenian legal and financial documents, liens against EK, declining EK profits and rising liabilities, and talk about the owners and high-ranking officers of the company. But we needed help understanding the personal liability of EK's CEOs, its officers, its managers, and its directors. So we got some help.
There are certain items, for example, failure to pay payroll taxes, where the owner would then become liable for those, an owner and an officer.
Through all of this investigation, a name that came up repeatedly was Matthias Kirch, former EK headquarters CEO and current 15% shareholder, whose company has an extreme credit risk in this agency. But there was one other name that caught us off guard and that we weren't expecting: Catherine Silberstein. We brought you this video with our brand new limited edition cyber skeleton foiled t-shirt that we just posted on store.gamersnexus.net, featuring a skeletal outline of the rib cage on the front and a service mount device themed spine on the back. The last time we made a shirt like this was for our Artesian Builds video, and it was our fastest selling shirt ever. This time we changed the colors and updated the foil, making a new series of cyber skeletons. It features computer components like memory modules, cables, water cooling tubes and pumps, that's fitting, to create a skeletal outline. The back uses MOSFETs, inductors, and small parts to form that brilliantly shiny foil spine with a vibrant blue. Like we said, between all the time, the experts, and investigators we retained, this video cost us $40,000. Please buy our shirts. But we did it because we think it's an important video. To help fund our future deep dive investigations, grab a Cyberskeleton t-shirt on store.gamersnexus.net. Last week, we published a video detailing EK's late payments to its suppliers, its external contractors, and we spoke of overtime shaving allegations from former W2 employees. After that, Igor's lab posted an article threatening debt collection as EK owed the outlet money for an outstanding ad invoice, after which EK scrambled to pay. Then Jay's 2 Cents posted a video.
Our initial contract was 6 figures. I think we might be one of the most owed in all of this. So I said, all right, you know what? Enough's enough. You're not worth our time anymore. This brand does not respect the 9 years I've been dealing with EK. The level of stress that has been put on my life and Brian's life and Nick's life is not worth it.
Der Bauer followed up, cutting ties with the company for his recent collaborations.
Weird things happening that morally I cannot accept. I don't want to be affiliated with. So seeing this kind of things happening is something I cannot accept. And that's why I decided that I have to cancel my cooperation with EK Waterblocks.
Following all of this, EK issued its own statement. Here's the beginning of it.
Dear community, media, and partners. First of all, I would like to say that we take this very seriously. It is true that some of EK external contractors and business partners have experienced delayed payments. We sincerely apologize for the difficulties this has caused them and the lack of adequate communication.
But make no mistake, EK's employees and its contractors were affected by the decisions and the actions of the EK headquarters office and the EK US office. Likewise, although we initially expressed a cautious optimism about Edvard Kunig's return as CEO, the fact of the matter is he has remained 85% shareholder minimally throughout all of this. And further still, worse, he was already at the helm of EK as CEO recently when the demand last week was sent containing what we believe to be intimidation of contractors and threats of prison time for speaking out. In the time since, PC Games N published a report of inappropriate workplace behavior, including allegations of an open culture enabled by management of unprofessionalism and hurtful discussion. We've been able to verify some of these claims with screenshots of servers, illustrating inappropriate workplace actions that clearly underscores a lack of leadership and guidance. To make comments like this, whether distasteful jokes or more hurtful, is completely unacceptable in a workplace. After EK learned of the existence of these records, we're told that it sent out an internal memo asking personnel to keep jokes, quote, tasteful. It's also our belief that EK headquarters is beginning a campaign to discredit whistleblower Dan Henderson's previous claims. We found an interview in Slovenian where EK CEO Edvard Kunig told Finance.si the following via machine translation. Kunig specifically explained to us that the basis for the, quote, sensational video, which is being picked up by foreign media online and now also domestic media, is a former external contractor who did not take the suspension of cooperation well and contacted the media and provided them with more confidential data and false information. But Henderson isn't alone. This time, several of his former colleagues gave us permission to put them on record with their names. And this is tremendously brave because EK has proven now that it's extremely litigious and that it has 140,000 euros combined of demands to former contractor Henderson across its 2 branches, plus the implied threat of a year in prison in a country he doesn't live in. We've offered to connect the former employees with some Texas-based lawyers that we've spoken with throughout this investigation. Let's get to the statements. One W2 employee said, quote, Dan's post mentions witnessing racism, which was in relation to an event that happened directly toward me. I was the only Black American in the entire company. So anytime anyone came to the office from Slovenia, the direct racism and implicit bias was insane, end quote. Jamari Sarati, former EKW2 employee in Texas. Another employee who wished to remain anonymous said this, quote, the overwhelming stress, racism, and misogyny that I witnessed and experienced are not acceptable in any measure, and the violation of labor laws leave me angry for my coworkers who were taken advantage of, end quote. Quote, regarding overtime, non or late payment most of the time occurred due to overtime conflicts. They wanted us to work a certain amount of overtime, but would only pay out a different amount. When I raised this as an issue, I was told it was due to budget concerns and that people on the EKWB side work for free, so that the US EKCS team should as well, end quote. Agent Perez, EKCS employee. Employees detailed the GN, and this official pay stub shows the time clock at 40.00 hours for multiple weeks, despite employees telling us that they had to manually clock in and out and were hourly workers, and indicating, of course, that they were going into overtime. Now, the likelihood of employees hitting precisely 40.00 hours for multiple weeks, while also having to clock in and out manually, seems astronomical. Quote, any bill you can think of was paid late at one time or another. Vendors told us we were not a priority for new products because they were owed late payments, EKCS employee. Likewise, we've received evidence and documentation of unsafe working practices, such as EK Texas employees being instructed to climb stacks of cardboard boxes approximately 6 to 10 feet high during warehouse intake of inventory and other OSHA violations. One employee told us that EK would frequently have warehouse employees perform unsafe actions to save money on shipping. And on behalf of these workers, and to leverage our greater resources than perhaps an individual former employee might have, we're submitting this documentation to the United States Occupational Safety and Health Administration, i.e. OSHA, with additional evidence not shown here for safety violations that were performed under the management and leadership of EKUS's CEO Kat Silberstein and her assigns. But it's possible HQ in Slovenia might try to pin this on the EKUS team as a matter of strategy. Now, one EK operations manager in the US told us this, quote, the EK Slovenian employee handbook is in violation of US laws. I told them we can't use that here. I took the headquarters employee handbook and customized it to the EKCS office. When then CEO Matias read it, he got extremely mad at me and said, no, we don't do that. We're doing the EK way. He and Eddie always said that, the EK way. I'll let them believe that we went back to using their manual. End quote, former EKUS operations manager. Here's what I think about this. All of this points towards a lack of leadership of the company top to bottom. And this implicates both the US and the Slovenian branches. And the crazy thing is, I haven't even gotten into the financial evidence that I have yet. And there's a lot of that too. But despite the problems with HQ, the US branch isn't clean either. Kat Silberstein would have still been CEO at the time that these recounts of lack of safety standards and training, delayed supplier payments, mismanaged funds, and payroll disputes would have happened, both alleged and those proven with evidence. And ultimately, the CEO is responsible. One employee told us that they typically would only see Silberstein in the office once per month. That may be because Silberstein is constantly traveling. On her public Facebook page, we found a non-stop carousel of photos showing semi-private flights, lavish food, and luxury outings. While some are personal trips, many of these are at industry events we know, with industry people, suppliers, and influencers we recognize. We learned that EK regularly pays for these expensive-looking outings, seemingly in conflict with the known downturn in revenue. EK's priorities appear to be in the wrong place when it comes to spending money. Upon appointment, EK boasted Silberstein as having 20 years of experience working with Fortune 500 companies, including Apple, Dell, Google, Microsoft, Nvidia, AMD, and Intel, they said. EK headquarters CEO Edvard Koenig previously stated, quote, I am confident she is the right leader to take the company forward. Silberstein and EK both purport decades of experience in leadership. She is not new to this, and neither is EK headquarters and its then CEO or now CEO. Between the three of them, there's 60 years of claimed executive experience. There's absolutely zero excuse for this level of dysfunction, and you cannot take all of the benefits of being a CEO, being effectively the last person standing, surrounded by the aftermath of layoffs and mismanagement, potentially rising to the level of illegality, while also escaping any responsibility. At least that's what I think. This was a collaborative failure. EK headquarters and EK Cooling Solutions have collectively failed their people and their suppliers as leaders. EKWB DOO is headquartered in Slovenia with a share capital of 582,776 euros as of its 2023 tax filing for tax year 2022. This office is where EK and its shareholders make executive decisions and perform R&D and engineering. We'll refer to this branch as EKHQ to make things easier. EKHQ has at least 5 wholly owned subsidiaries. We've found some potential other ones too. EK Cooling Solutions LLC is its suspended Texas entity. EK reported that this one has a share capital in 2022 of 2.65 million euros and a profit of 462,000 euros, or about $500,000 US. EK's US CEO operates from Napa Valley, California, with contract companies SwiftTech in Pico Rivera and XenoWolf in Santa Clarita. Hopping across the Pacific, EK Japan LLC in Tokyo was reported as having a share capital of just 70,382 euros and profit of 90,000 euros before taxes. Next, Shanghai Tandao Computer Technology Company Limited, which we think EK sometimes lists under an alias EKWB Co. Limited on US import forms we obtained, is an EK branch reporting $0 of share capital and a 44,000 euro loss. Flying west, EK's final two branches we know of include EKDS DOO in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which then had a $0 share and $0 profit, followed by its new EKSR DOO branch in Belgrade, Republic of Serbia. This branch is new, and the 2022 tax document that we have says this, quote, "The increase in long-term investments in 2022 amounts to 1.158 million euros and relates to the share in the related companies EK Japan LLC in Japan at 70,187 of that, and EKSR Serbia at 1.037 million euros, and EKDS in Bosnia at 51,000 via machine translation of the tax document." And the ownership of this interesting grouping of locations across the world is complicated. EKWB DOO is 100% owner of its worldwide entities, but EKWB itself is owned 85% by founder and current CEO Edward Koenig. The other 15% is held by Ideas, an investment company with a single known investment, and Ideas is 100% held by Matthias Kirch, former CEO of EK. Digging up loan documents, we learned that Ideas appears to have taken a loan, or maybe it's more of an IOU, with Edward Koenig personally, the EK owner. From our understanding of these documents, it appears that Koenig gave a loan of 2.055 million euros from Edward Koenig personally to Ideas. And then it appears that Ideas used that money to purchase shares from Edward Koenig. Ideas is 100% owned by Kirch. It also looks to have a 4-year payment plan. Now, this whole thing seems interesting to us for two reasons. One is that the money appears to have been borrowed from Koenig and then given directly back to Koenig. The other one that we'll get into later is that it appears as if it hasn't even been fully paid back yet. But EK Waterblocks also has its own loans. This Slovenian government page details the liens against EK Waterblocks. All of the liens on this page were created in July of 2023, when it was facing financial struggles, and are due to mature in July of 2024. The liens were created in exchange for what appear to be loans to EK Waterblocks from companies such as Valion Financial Company, Madra Holdings and Investments, and what appears to be an insurance company. They're all at a brutal 10% interest rate, with a total outstanding amount of 968,000 euros. It's using its inventory as collateral. In this filing, the company pushed $1.158 million into its Japan and Serbia entities in what we assume is cash. It pushed a loan of 874,315 euros to its own management or owner, so that's nearly €1 million going out from EK to management on loan. It also loaned US subsidiary EK Cooling Solutions LLC an amount of $5 million USD. Our contacts at EK US say that sometimes interest was applied to EK HQ's loans to EK US. Throughout this investigation, we've had trouble figuring out where that $5 million went. Likewise, we struggle to understand why a company that brought in collectively $100 million in revenue over the past several years needs to loan its owners €1 million. And that is where Koenig's partner, Ideas, comes back into the picture. Ideas claims to be a consulting firm specializing in grants and finances. An industry contact once told us that Ideas' owner and then CEO of EK, Matthias Kirch, introduced himself at an event by saying, quote, "Do you know what I do at EK? I am a storyteller." And his company's tax forms tell one hell of a story. Ideas' tax filing indicates that it has taken on an additional €1 million in long-term loans since acquiring the 15% shares, but its shares remain at 15%. The IDS tax year 2023 filing from just last week, filed in 2024, shows long-term assets of 3.124 million euros. The 14,050 euros of intangible assets is the only increase from 2022 in this field, and IDS also holds 3.11 million euros in long-term financial investments. But there's something curious. IDS's liabilities total 3.41 million. And in that, there's still a short-term liability of 2.055 million euros, or in other words, the exact amount that was owed to Edward Koenig for the purchase of 15% of EK. And you can see that here. Unless IDS makes it a habit of taking out IOUs for 2.055 million euros, this is a suspicious figure to still see on the tax forms, the balance sheet. The company has been around since 2006, 3 years after EK Waterblocks was founded, and despite its maturity, it only has 35,829.38 euros in cash. It may have been the case that Koenig, the founder of EK Waterblocks, said to Kirch, "I don't care what you need, I need you in the business." But what's more interesting to us is where the money went. The US branch got a $5 million loan from EK headquarters recently, and that is what we're curious about. The loan was on the books for EK headquarters as of December 2022. EK laid off its entire Texas-based workforce and stopped paying its Texas franchise taxes in 2024, which means it had 2 years to burn $5 million. Let's look at the costs. EK's Texas offices were small. They had 2 units in this office plaza. We called the brokers, and we were quoted at about $11.50 per square foot per year for EK's former space. That'd be these 2 corner units. That's a total of 12,424 square feet, which would cost around $143,000 US per year. Okay, so in 2 years, that's a little over $286,000. Not quite $5 million yet. So our hunt for the $5 million continues. EK's US office had around 10 to 12 simultaneously employed staff towards the latter months of the operation. Through sources and pay stubs, we've corroborated somewhere in the range of around $500,000 to $800,000 of payroll costs at one point in EKCS's existence per year. Managers told us they fought with headquarters to increase wages from $15 per hour for staff building its $5,000 computers, and we do have pay stubs of that rate as well, so the total payroll cost varied. The managers explained that EK couldn't afford to lose good people, but it was difficult, they said, to get HQ to permit a pay bump beyond $1 to $3 an hour on top of the 15 or so. EK Cooling Solutions LLC needing to get permission from HQ for these changes is strange to us, if it's intended to operate as a standalone business in the US, but maybe this was in the operating agreement somewhere. That $500,000 to $800,000 payroll range includes executive salaries, which we'll come back to this later, but we were told that Kat Silberstein's unexpectedly low pay as CEO set off alarm bells in the payroll department, to which she reportedly stated to that department that EK headquarters was also paying her as a contractor. It sounds like it all kind of mixed together. At most, between the rent and the payroll, EK Cooling Solutions would be somewhere in the range of maybe $1.7 million for 2 years of operation, not counting other miscellaneous expenses. And they'd of course still have inventory expenses and purchases, which could be a major cost. But those inventory purchases should be generating revenue and of course should be generating profit on the sales of the inventory. Yet with the company firing its Texas-based workforce and deciding to outsource that work to SwiftTech and XenoWolf in the more expensive California, we have to wonder what happened. What confused us the most, though, and what we couldn't find a resolution to, was the division between the headquarters off-record employees and staff we spoke with and the US-based staff, where they had completely different ideas of whether EK Cooling Solutions in the US was profitable or not. HQ seemed to think that it was purely a drain on resources with no end in sight, while EK Cooling Solutions in the US seems to think that HQ was effectively overreaching and overdrawing, putting them in a position where they could not generate profit. And for that, ultimately, it's the parent company that will bear the responsibility, regardless of why one entity might or might not be profitable enough. But what we do know is that we have received even more claims of EK headquarters, putting EK Cooling Solutions LLC in positions where it could lose money. One staff member we spoke with said this, quote, "Oh, and one additional side note too, because EK Fluid works in California. a company called Xenowolf or something like that, somehow started doing bigger server type computers that were also liquid cooled. We stored a lot of their inventory at an offsite warehouse that we were having to pay. So we were storing this equipment and some big bulky stuff, about 12 to 15 pallets. Whenever they would need stuff, we would ship it to them. So we were paying monthly storage fees, and we were paying for transit for shipping stuff from the warehouse out to California. But we never got reimbursed for it. EK Cooling in San Antonio was constantly paying to support EK Fluid Works, which is another downturn in the revenue stream, which is why we could not be profitable in San Antonio. But Eddie and Matjaž were okay with that, going back to the why did we have to take loans from headquarters and everyone else. We asked that employee, were they a different entity or were they part of EK Cooling Solutions? And that employee, to the best of their knowledge, responded with this: no, they were a different entity, completely different, completely different. We just helped support them, and we should have been reimbursed for any expenses for storage fees and shipping. And that's an interesting story, because what that means at this point is that we now have multiple reports from multiple employees, some on record, some off, that as described, EKHQ would effectively use EK Cooling Solutions as an instrument. And that is something we'll get into in a little bit with the lawyers discussing it. Now, to quickly recap, we've now heard the following claims. U.S. employees state that EK headquarters would sometimes draw the total revenue of some sales from EK Cooling Solutions account, saddling them with the cost of the item, but no revenue. U.S. employees stated that EK Cooling Solutions LLC was instructed by headquarters to financially support outside projects without reimbursement. This one has a significant quote we've put on the screen as well. U.S. employees state that EK Cooling Solutions had to pay for employees who were responsible for operations not related to EK Cooling Solutions, such as operations in Europe. U.S. employees stated that EK headquarters would charge interest to EK Cooling Solutions in the U.S. for funds extended to it, with those employees alleging that since EK headquarters would saddle the U.S. with various unexpected costs for which there was no reimbursement, including sometimes cost of goods sold, they then ended up in a situation where they could not pay it down. Now, this story is starting to get very interesting here, because we're moving away from something as simple as just not paying your contractors, shorting your employees on overtime, allegedly, and not paying your suppliers, and into a different territory, which is business law, commingling of assets, piercing the corporate veil, and various other topics we'll speak with Vincent Augusta about shortly. But the trend here is this, just trying to compile all of these statements from all the different people with whom we've spoken. It sounds like EKUS had various expenses from EK headquarters, and every way they found to account for it, or to bill for it, or to recoup the costs on it, they would be overridden in some capacity by EKWBDOO, as we understand it. And all this comes back to one thing, which is if EK headquarters were to now try and pin this on the US as being responsible, that means they would have to implicate Kat Silberstein. There's no way around it. Silberstein is the CEO of the US office, and we already know that EK headquarters made Matjaž Kirch kind of the fall guy, so to speak. We wouldn't be surprised to see if they start distancing themselves from Silberstein as well. Now, Silberstein is a personal friend of Koenig and was also directly appointed by Koenig to run the U.S. division. As we understand it, she's also a paid contractor of EK headquarters alongside with being or having been a W-2 employee of EK Cooling Solutions. So this complicates the business relationship. Here's a roadmap to make it easier, I guess. To the best of our abilities, compiling a mixture of public reports, private text messages, and emails between executives that were leaked to us from multiple parties, and on and off record sources, this is an overly simplified org chart to try and understand the flow of commands and the flow of money. Matjaž Kirch and Edvard Koenig start us off. The loan agreement between them creates a Zen-like circle leading to EK Water Blocks. EK Water Blocks leads to EK Cooling Solutions, EK Japan, EK DS, EK SR, and EK's China branch. Let's follow the lines. Kat Silberstein has been a contractor for EK Water Blocks headquarters, but is also the CEO and director of EK Cooling Solutions. Likewise, she's a board member of the unrelated company Mass Luminosity, but is related because actually it's the parent of social media website G Tribe, which receives sponsorships from either EK Cooling Solutions or EK headquarters. We're not sure which because they're inconsistent in their language. EK Cooling Solutions still technically exists despite having a tax forfeiture status and being functionally just Silberstein, her personal assistant, and a couple of others. We found that Ivan Bimbalov, as a registered agent of EK Cooling Solutions, is also on the list, but also his name is repeatedly repeatedly appearing in U.S. import documents. He was also the director of purchasing. Following Ivan's trail, he's also the importer for EK Fluid Works. We're not sure if that's a separate company or not, but it's listed as a separate importing entity from what we can tell. Following EK Fluid Works, we take a left past tax forfeiture and get back to EK Cooling Solutions. We can follow that up to its contractor at Rokon Industries, aka SwiftTech DBA. SwiftTech is Kat Silverstein's former employer, and the same year that she joined EK Cooling Solutions as CEO, she was the vice president of sales at SwiftTech. That's interesting. After EKUS staff were fired, we were told that SwiftTech absorbed some of the tasks. Silverstein is also the founder of O1 International Networking Communications LLC, which she abbreviates as O1 Inc., which when we asked our lawyer to investigate this firm, his first response was Inc., but it's not incorporated. That's misleading. We found an O1 Inc. registered in Delaware. Why is it always Delaware? That was registered by the company corporation, which is a registered agent company used to obfuscate individuals. That means Silverstein's name isn't on it if it were to be on it. However, we found a Facebook post on her profile listing the July 2011 launch of O1 International Networking Communications, which is the same month and year of the O1 International Networking Communications founding in Delaware, not to mention the unique name match. If that indeed is hers, it was canceled by Delaware for failure to pay tax and currently owes $1,643 in taxes to the state of Delaware. We know that Silverstein has been a contractor for EKWB HQ in Slovenia previously, and it may have been done under O1 International Networking Communications, so we'll follow that line back to HQ. That brings us back to EKCS, which at one point had Miguel Covertier listed as the registered agent and managing director. He was actually the one to file the original paperwork for EK Cooling Solutions, we're not sure why, and Covertier is also the VP of operations at Titan Rig, which has done business with both EK Cooling Solutions and EK headquarters. Back to EK headquarters, we can follow that to Koenig, where the money circle with Kirch is still flowing like a river, right where we left it. So there's a lot of interesting data points here where everybody is connected in this web somehow, and in a lot of cases it's by multiple points. There aren't really that many dead ends here, and we found other tangential links as well, but did have to make it somewhat legible, so we stopped there. But the most interesting, I personally think, is the fact that Silverstein is listed as SwiftTech's former VP of sales, while also, according to her LinkedIn profile within 6 months, moving to EK Cooling Solutions to accept a role as CEO, which then went on in the future to axe EK Cooling Solutions in Texas and replace it with contract labor from companies like Xenowolf and SwiftTech, which we found very interesting. Now, the other point of curiosity was that sponsorship brokered with a company where she holds a board position that seems otherwise completely disconnected from EK. It's not even in the hardware industry. So very interesting. Now, we also found the registered agent situation of EK's US division to be strange. They changed multiple times, didn't make a lot of sense to us. And while we're on the topic of EK's relationships, we paid a logistics expert to help create another one. We made another web. But this one was using import data in the US to look at all of EK's suppliers and buyers, and that was pretty useful. Hopefully this one's simpler. Let's look. Nope. All right, well, we did one of these already, so let's try it. This is a map of EK's suppliers and buyers that we've fancified with 3D graphics. The center column solves to the left and right columns of bubbles. It's the supplier. Using US import records for EK Cooling Solutions, sometimes called EK Cooling Solution, we noticed EK is inconsistent in getting its own company name right, with or without an S. It seems to interchange names with its Shanghai division. There were names that popped up that aren't on any of its tax forms, and this all just reinforces all this other sloppiness, if nothing else. It's normal for companies to have a complicated web of imports and suppliers, but we found it useful because this allowed us to start identifying which suppliers and buyers we should contact when researching for the story. For example, you can see that EK Cooling Solutions on the left is buying from Dongguan Zhenping Co. Limited, a supplier that we found to be one of EK's largest sources of imports. They became a useful data point. We also found EKWB DOO or HQ, meaning that EKCS in that instance bought from EKWB. It's actually not strange in this instance, seeing as EKWB makes the products, it sells it to itself in another subsidiary to use them. EKWB DOO also sold to the second cluster of names on the far right. EK Cooling Solutions again appears Titan Rig, Xenowolf, Digital Storm, and a warehouse. Dongguan EKWB Co. Limited was also an interesting find in the suppliers column because we didn't see that name in EK's Slovenian tax statements declaring its subsidiaries. It may be more sloppiness of entity names. Now that we've looked into all the crazy mixing and matching relationships in this big, complicated web of things, we need to get into some of the legal discussion. So for this, we have two lawyers we're speaking with today. The first is Vincent Augusta, attorney at law and GN legal correspondent. He's appeared for the Asus warranty discussion and the Lian Li versus Fantex lawsuits previously. Vincent will be focusing on discussion of how piercing the corporate veil works, commingling of assets, civil conspiracy, LLCs in general, things like that. We'll also talk with a lawyer based in Texas who practices employment law for a firm. And both lawyers focus on US law, so we don't get into Slovenian stuff, because obviously. Now, for any former EK employees watching, if you were employed by the Texas branch, even if you didn't live there at the time, but you were employed by them, we have arranged with the firm we're talking to today to receive your messages for a free consultation. They have some of the background to this. It'll get them up to speed a little faster. Put the details on the screen for you if you want to make use of that for any claims you may have relating to EK Cooling Solutions LLC. The information's on the screen, and we'll talk about it at the end. Let's start this discussion with Vincent. First question I have for you is to set the groundwork for everyone. What exactly is an LLC, and what do LLCs or other forms of corporations, what purpose do they intend to serve in the US?
Yeah, so the role of an LLC or a corporation from a liability perspective is that it limits the liability that the owners and the shareholders have for the actions and the damages caused by the corporation. The idea is that an LLC or a corporation is its own legal entity, and therefore it and it alone is responsible for the damages that it causes, as long as the proper rules are followed and the requirements are met. As businesses became more sophisticated, they needed more capital. They wanted to encourage people to participate in this ownership. And as they got larger, the liability became more unstable and unknown. And so this was magnified also by the increase in businesses doing things that are important for society, but also very dangerous. And so think railroads, airliners, petrochemical companies. If there wasn't limited liability for BASF, no one would buy stock in it, right? Because the liability would just be too high.
Is there a way to go after the individual, even if they have an LLC or a corporation?
You would need to get a court to move past that corporate barrier and bring the liability directly to the owners or the shareholders, or piercing the corporate veil, as it's sometimes called. Courts are reluctant to do this. It's usually reserved for very extreme situations, but it does happen. The things that the court will look towards are to see who is controlling this business. And so they'll look at things like whether the business is inadequately capitalized, right? If there's no money in the business because it's being siphoned out, to avoid exposure, that indicates that it's simply an instrument of someone else. They'll look to see if the business participates in the corporate formalities, if there's a separate bank account, if they have minutes. They'll look to see if the business is totally controlled or dominated by another entity, a person, or maybe a parent corporation. And then they'll look to see if it's excessively fragmented. And so, judging by those factors, the court will determine whether or not the owner or shareholder should be liable. And there's kind of a recent example of this in 2020. The Court of Appeals in North Carolina dealt with an issue where a business had an arbitration in Texas, and there was a very large judgment against that corporation or LLC. And they moved all of their assets out of that business into another business, and summarily dissolved the corporation. So what happened is, after they dissolved the first company that had the judgment against them, the plaintiffs from that action went after not only the second company, where all the assets were moved to, but then they also went after the owner. And their argument was the same. Their argument was, these are simply instruments of this other person. This was a fraudulent conveyance, a fraudulent transaction, and we should have access to that to resolve this judgment. And the Court of Appeals agreed with them.
You mentioned inadequately capitalized or adequately capitalized. So what specifically does that mean?
So the issue with capitalization is that a company needs to have money in it to go through its normal business operations. And so one of the things that a court will look for when they're trying to determine if a company or an LLC or corporation is merely an instrument of some other entity, is they'll look to see if it's properly capitalized. And that will depend on the industry, it'll depend on what the business is supposed to be doing. But if you are simply taking all the money out of the business, and then every single time you need to spend money, you're putting the exact amount in only to spend the money moving forward, then you're not properly capitalizing the business, you're using it as an instrument of a different entity. For the most part, it's a common sense understanding of the way that this liability protection should operate, is that if individuals are going to have protection from liability, it is because they're entering into business in good faith and they're operating a legitimate business. If they're using the business as a way of protecting other businesses, then really they're one and the same thing. They're an alter ego that in effect is just part of the same entity.
Okay, I see. Are there any other examples of ways to hold someone liable from outside of their corporate protection?
Well, another example of how someone could be responsible for liability without having directly made a bad action would be through something like a conspiracy. So a conspiracy is when two or more people agree to commit an illegal act or to do something that's legal but in an illegal way.
Okay.
And if there is an act that furthers that common scheme, then all of the members of the conspiracy can be held liable for that action, even if they weren't the ones who directly committed that action. And so with a civil conspiracy specifically, the act would be a civil action, an illegal civil act.
Okay, as opposed to criminal.
As opposed to criminal, which on principle functions very similarly, but there can be slight differences depending on jurisdiction. But once the conspiracy is entered into, any co-conspirator's actions can have liability for the other co-conspirators.
Okay.
A common example is to the kind of interruption of a business, is that if you have a business that has an agreement with a third party and the third party and another party conspire to disrupt that agreement, that could function as a civil conspiracy. Fraud, if you're working with another person, one person's committing the fraudulent act, the other person's trying to cover it up or hiding the proceeds. So if you had a foreign entity working with a local person and they were conspiring to commit some sort of illegal act, then that would still legitimately be a conspiracy. And anyone who's participating in that common scheme could be civilly liable. If two businesses or an individual and a business were conspiring to commit an illegal act of not participating in proper payment of employees, not paying invoices, breaking contracts, all of those things could potentially be a civil conspiracy. As long as the underlying action itself is an illegal act, then the agreement to participate jointly to effectuate that act would lead to the liability for the co-conspirators.
Okay. Where is the line? You mentioned criminal and civil. Where's the line for criminality? When does it cross over?
Well, the criminal statutes kind of dictate where an action is criminal versus civil. Most of the examples we've talked about, virtually all of the examples we talked about in terms of the normal business operations, they're generally considered to be civil. However, depending on how you go about making those things happen, there could potentially be criminal liability. So for example, if you are misrepresenting your taxes, if you're misrepresenting the assets you have, how much money you made, where that money went after it was made, and you do so for the intent of evading tax liability, that could potentially be criminal, as opposed to just civil penalties for not paying your taxes on time. Additionally, if you're not paying employees, generally would be a civil matter, but if you were to lie about that under oath, if you were to forge a signature or a document, then it might rise to the level of criminality.
I see. I think that covers the questions for this one. As always, we film a lot extra, talk through it all, and Vincent will very likely be returning for another video in the not too distant future. We have some other legal-related coverage topics that we've been looking into, so you can watch for everyone watch for his return for that. And otherwise, we will leave a link in the description if you might want to retain his services.
Appreciate it, Steve.
Yeah,
Great to be here. Thank you.
Our next one is a short section of a call that we had with Rapp & Kroc and attorney Kieran Wheeler, based in Texas. Rapp & Kroc handles employment law and other aspects of law as well, and we've lightly pre-briefed the firm to arrange for EK branch employees to email ahead for a free consultation. You can use the information on the screen for that. The first topic that we asked about is about what happens in Texas if an entity enters a status such as tax forfeiture.
The first step, if an entity falls out of good standing, is for the comptroller to forfeit their right to transact business. What that typically is caused by is failure to file a tax return or a public information report. It's an annual obligation in Texas. And it's easily done online. It's very easy to file these, but what typically happens is that you do one part but not both. And so if you've made any failure in that, the comptroller will send you a notice indicating that you have a short period of time to come into compliance. And if you don't, then they send you an official notification forfeiting your right to transact business.
Next, we asked about personal liability of CEOs and officers in the event of entering a poor standing status.
The people that are in charge of the daily operations, the managers, the officers, can become liable for the daily debts of the company. There are some exceptions to this, but if they know that they're incurring a debt on behalf of the company, then they can be held liable for it because the company is not in good standing anymore.
The next question was about the complexity of foreign entities being involved, again, relating to all of this.
If you do have an international company that comes in, you have to look at the structure, how the ownership is held, and really at that point you're looking at the cost of enforcement. Let's say you've got a company that has some debts and they add up to $1 million and then they leave town, basically. They terminate the entity or they abandon the entity and all the local assets. Then you have to decide whether or not that $1 million is worth chasing the ownership, chasing the structure overseas.
And finally, debts to suppliers and how a forfeiture status could affect those debts and the handling of them.
When we talk about an officer of the company, the CEO, that's when we really start getting into who has control of the company and who's got the ability to incur some of these debts that would then extend to them personally. In an ordinary situation, officers are not liable for the debts of the company, although there are certain items, for example, failure to pay payroll taxes, where the owner would then become liable for those, an owner and an officer. Be aware of the potential personal liabilities that could arise if you do operate, because if the company is forfeited, not involuntarily terminated, but just forfeited, and you go out and you buy some equipment or you sign a contract as a managing person of that company, that's something that you could be personally liable for.
We're at the end of this video, but we're not at the end of this story. Our investigators, our lawyers, everyone who contributed to this, first of all, thank you if you're watching, but everyone who contributed collected mountains of additional evidence and data, and for now, we feel like this recaps it pretty succinctly. Having a wide picture of everything, this kind of puts it together for us of what the hell is going on at EK right now. What are they doing? And the vast majority of this was collected from things like public information, tax forms, lien forms, loan documents, and things of that nature. And the rest was informed by evidence from former employees and current employees, contractors. We've talked enough about EK for right now. Let's start with talking about what we want to do to try and help some of the EK former employees or current employees who may be soon former employees if EK keeps acting the way it does. So for EK Cooling Solutions staff specifically, if you're in Texas, we had a number of companies there contact us the last few days. They knew we were working on this story. They want resumes, job titles or former positions you've held, email addresses. I'm working to collect those as best I can. It's me collecting it directly from people. It's going to take me a little bit. But the one name I wanted to specifically drop was Nick Dankner. So Nick Dankner is the CEO of Starforge Systems, and he contacted me first. The reason this is special is because Nick is the former COO of Artesian Builds. He was sort of the good half of the company, and he had a great team. And I met with Nick and with his 12 or so employees freshly after the fallout of Artesian Builds. They had lost their jobs instantaneously with really not much of a warning. We met with them. I talked to them on and off record. We put together that story. And when I left the meeting with them, I collected their names and their resumes, and I said, I'm going to do my best. And I sent those out to a lot of people in the industry, and I hope it helped somebody out there. I'm not sure, but we did try for the people we met with because they were great people. They seemed very qualified in a horrible company, or at least one that was run horribly. And that Nick, now as a successful CEO of his own system integrator, reached back out to me and said, I want to do the same for the EK people. That was pretty special. That's cool. So I'm going to be sending the information we get from the EK people to Nick. He works for Starforge. He doesn't necessarily have roles right now, but he's going to keep your names for when they open up. So that's for the EK people watching. Here's what you all need to do. So if you're one of the people who work there, if I spoke to you or not, send me an email at team@gamersnexus.net. Patrick and I will filter through those, and I will put the information together. I need you to send me your name, your contact information, your resume, and the position you held that is the most relevant to this industry. I'll put that in a spreadsheet. I'll send it out. We'll do our best. Now, second, if you're an employee of EK Cooling Solutions, LLC in Texas, whether or not you lived in Texas, one of our agents has spoken with an employment law firm. I asked someone who contributes to our team to do that, and he lightly briefed them on the situation to make things a little easier for you all. So their information is on the screen. They told our agent that you can contact them for a free consultation. The firm told us that they would be happy to consult with you on it. The firm specializes in a few things, so unsafe workplace claims, harassment claims, or labor law disputes, and things like retaliatory employer actions. Now let's talk EK briefly. So this section is my opinion based on our evidence. We're going to close this thing out. First of all, EK is behaving in a completely unacceptable way. So paying people late, that's not good already. That's unacceptable, yes, but all the other stuff we talked in here, it kind of goes from unacceptable to crazy. Like, how is this actually possible? And the nicest way I can phrase it, with the least amount of energy, is really to just say this is unbefitting of a company of EK's size and stature. EK is the #1 water block or water cooling supplier, manufacturer in the industry. From my viewpoint, it feels like EK is worried more about spending money to get relationships in the industry, to project this sort of soft power. As we publish this, we've heard that EK is attempting to discredit people, discredit Dan Henderson, who sort of started this, discredit individual whistleblowers who spoke with us. And that is likewise concerning if it indeed is doing that, because what it needs to be doing is, like it said, taking accountability. This really, it seems like this needs to begin with a clearing of house, of upper management. I'm not sure how an organization can operate with this level of dysfunction and not just be sort of corrupted or tainted throughout the company. Now, originally, when we did part 1, I said in there that I thought it might be salvageable. Part of that is because Edward Koenig had just recently come back as CEO, the founder, and I don't really know him. I've spoken with him for events about products. That's about it. From what I've heard from people I respect in the industry, I thought, okay, maybe there's a chance. But, you know, I'm very disappointed in what I've seen so far, because the aggressive, what we think are retaliatory actions, combined with this, it seems like internal obsession based on everything I've heard in the last couple days of discrediting rather than fixing, that to me says it might not be fixable, because you're not going to fix it by doing that. When we first published the report, I had a different opinion. I told Roman and EK's staff the same thing in the early days, and as we dug more and more, the last couple days especially, my opinion completely flipped. We've seen some of the messages from within EK's camp. We've seen some of the aggressive legal action and slippery wording and the apology video, and we can really no longer be certain what their path is. And it's unclear to us whether EK can recover between the financials of the company and the company culture. And it remains to be determined how this resolves. But as for responsibility, here's how I view it. If you are the CEO, you are responsible. If you own 85% of the company, you are responsible. If you call yourself the CEO and in contract documents and whatever, it says you're the CEO and you run a subsidiary, you're also responsible. It's as simple as that to me. That's where we draw the line. That's what we care about. There is zero excuse for a CEO to allow the sorts of things to happen that we've been talking about today. And it is something that is actively allowed because the CEO is responsible for building the culture, they're responsible for selecting the people, and they're responsible for choosing assigns who act responsibly. That's what it comes down to. And I get the sense, in EK's apology thing, it was only 2 minutes long, but in there they had the talk of Koenig returning and a change in management. And with this, it almost looks, ironically, more like a sidestepping of accountability to say, it was that guy. By the way, still 15% owner, but he's gone now. We'll fix it. That is not the way, in my opinion. So anyway, EK reported over 50 million euros in net sales revenue in 2021, and the behaviors we've described herein are not at all in alignment with that kind of money. You are past the stages of learning. You're past the stages of not understanding how to operate in various locations or manage people in a way that is responsible. And that's about all there is to it. So at this point, it's going to take a lot. And I don't want to talk to EK until I see a public retraction of some of the things that they've done and until I see some more direct accountability, more direct focus on fixing. I want to say one more thing here. I've spent probably about 6 hours a day for the last week on the phone talking to people who either work at EK currently or have worked at EK. And it's those rank and file people I've spoken to where talking with some of the engineers, the R&D team, talking with some of the operations people especially, there are definitely competent people who have worked at EK or who work at EK currently. And those rank and file people are the ones who I feel bad for them because management is just completely derailing the company. And it does remind me of Artesian in a lot of those ways. But EK has a lot of great people in its ranks, and they might like the job, as in the job description, as in design this thermal solution, but not necessarily the way the business administration is set up. And that's a big disconnect. So, it's unfortunate that the leadership is fucking this up so royally. What we found points more and more increasingly towards this sort of deeply rooted, compromised ethics and this corruption of ethics and values at the highest levels of the company. And I can think of some ethical paths forward, but it is not my job to advise EK. As much as I want to share the ideas I have, I feel like that just causes more problems because they need to solve this internally. And that solution can't really come from outside because then it can't be trusted as genuine. It just starts to look like they're trying to capitulate. So, anyway, they have to figure that out if they are going to stick around with all of this. And EK has to root out whatever led them down this path, and we will be watching. But for the rank and file people, there's good people there, and I feel terribly for them because they get caught up in this. And it's sort of this classic story of greed and executives at the high levels causing problems for the people who really make the company tick. So that's it. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more. Grab one of these shirts to support us directly, and we'll see you all next time.